now.
Brilliant. And hopefully, can people see the slide deck that I've just popped up on screen? Is that there? Fantastic. Right. Okay. Let's leap in. So we've done quick intros, but just to clarify, just sort of recap on that. So hello, I'm Rob. At the time we're talking about, I was a strategic director at Hackney, and now I work for Public Digitals, working across a range of different clients. Martin, head of product at Unboxed, was a really important partner for us, not only on the work on social care, but worked with us on a number of other projects. One of kind of a group of really excellent digital agencies we were very fortunate to work with. And Alex, who's now at TPX, was one of our senior delivery managers, part of a really great team that we'd pulled together over the years before the work that we're talking about here. Also, we're really fortunate. Dominic Campbell led some of the early work around social care recovery and where we might take this, and Emma McGowan also then led a lot of our led our work around social care transformation. So a lot of the work that we'll talk about today. So a big team of really brilliant people behind this work. In terms of what we're doing, I'm going to talk a little bit about the context around open source, why it mattered to us at Hackney, how it fitted into what we're trying to do. A little bit about the context for the work we're talking about today, which came out of the cyber attack we experienced in 2020. Then Alex and Martin will talk about the work itself, and then we'll just sort of wrap up with a few quick reflections. So, open source as a tool for change. This won't surprise anybody, but I continue to marvel at, while we talk about really innovative use of modern technology in local government, move to cloud, AI, digital services, we all know that underneath the hood is a morass of 1990s and early 2000s tech, which just we struggle to move on from. There are lots of really critical services which rely on tech and are run using technology architectures which you would have recognized if you were there in 2000, and which really haven't kept up with the internet era. That presents all manner of issues, user experience issues, efficiency, productivity issues. They create barriers for partnership, it locks in cost, and also it makes security harder. We also know that suppliers are exceptionally good at lock-in. Doesn't matter whether they're big, global tech companies or whether they're sort of specialist providers in the local gov market. They're really good at locking you in, and we really struggle in the sector to get the levers to take any control over that. And I think one of the things which I felt very strongly about is how important it is to be clear that collective buying power doesn't mean all turning up at the meeting and make it easier for the suppliers to raise the invoices. Collective buying power means taking deliberate and concerted action together to regain some of those levers. And we've heard some good talks in the series this week, local gov Drupal, I think, being the example which has gained most traction. I think this is really important. For us at Hackney, we had been working around modernisation well ahead of the cyber attack we experienced. We were founding, kind of signatories of the local gov declaration in its first iteration. For us, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We used the technology code of practice as our sort of foundation for our strategic approach to technology. We did not only want to do, we'll just buy it, build everything ourselves, but we sort of had an approach here where if there was modern cloud-based software with open APIs available in the cloud, that would be our first port of call. That would be our preference. Where that wasn't available, then we would look to what are the other options, which could mean building modern open source software hosted in the cloud. What we'll be talking about today is an example of that, but this wasn't the only example. If necessary, in some areas where there wasn't a competitive marketplace and we wouldn't have the capacity to build our way out of that ourselves, we would still be wanting to push to the cloud and, if necessary, operate legacy applications in the cloud. So seeing Darren here, we work closely with AWS on that. And really importantly, it's not just about the new, it's also about getting rid of the old. So we would be working on retiring legacy applications and infrastructure. So for example, at the time of the cyber attack, we had removed 95% of our Windows computers and replaced them with Chrome. We had fully decommissioned on-premise Exchange and were fully in the cloud for email and productivity. That was really important in terms of where we found ourselves after the cyber attack, and it meant we still had a number of really key systems available, which would not have been available to us if we hadn't done that. Turning cyber into an opportunity. So As a lever for change, I strongly recommend not having cyber attacks. It's really tough. It's very, very hard, very taxing on the organization, huge impacts on residents. Um, but actually, the cyber threats are real. They are growing. We were relatively early on in the sort of the wave of cyber that we've seen. We weren't the first council to be hit at scale, but we certainly weren't the last. Um, those threats are a really important lever for change. That underlying morass of legacy is a huge cyber risk, and it's a real opportunity for you to sort of drive that push to modernization. Everyone will be working in all of the councils here and elsewhere will be working really hard on cyber. Assume that everyone else who's been hit was working hard too, and assume that the only safe bet is your controls won't work. The attackers only need to find one vulnerability and exploit it. You need to protect against every vulnerability. So for us, when we were hit in October 2020, it was immediately obvious it was a really big thing, but then quickly it became apparent just how broad the impacts were. We were fortunate, like I said, where we'd already made our move to the cloud, and very importantly, made deliberate choices about how we did it. We didn't create dependencies from our cloud services back to our on-prem services unless we had no means to avoid that. So that meant we still had email, we still had our website, we still had our telephone system, we could still operate our contact center. There were a lot of things we could do, but the list of things we could not do was still enormous. In terms of recovering, and this then explains the context of the work that we're going to talk about. In the initial stages, your business continuity rapidly wheels into action. We quickly reassigned people like Alex, like Soraya, other members of the team to work with our services to help stand up interim arrangements. So we were running a lot of key services using Google Forms and spreadsheets. We were working hard to maintain data in as structured a form as possible because we knew we had to bring things back together again later. With social care, we had two things. We couldn't simply turn Mosaic back on. So we consciously chose a twin track approach. So one was to use data that we were able to recover, which we were very fortunate to be able to do, to rebuild Mosaic. But we knew that that was going to be a 2-year project. A full re-implementation of a social care system is non-trivial. So at the same time as that, we didn't want to have those services running for an extended period, just relying on spreadsheets. So that's where we stepped into this second track of work, which we call Modern Tools for Social Care. But really importantly, both tracks were equally important. So while we were absolutely committed to the Mosaic recovery, we also absolutely put our energies into the second track as well. So I'll hand over to Alex and let him tell you a bit about that. Alex, if you just tell me when you want me to jump on the slides.
Great. Yeah, as Rob mentioned, we set out on a 2-track approach, and I'm going to be talking about the Modern Tools for Social Care work, so the second track, not the Mosaic recovery. And this is going to be a quick whistle-stop tour of the story of Modern Tools for Social Care. If you want to do the next slide. Before I get going, I think it's really important to recognise the first two visions that we had for both adults and children's social care. They're pretty much quite aligned with one another. We just thought that we could help develop better technology for both adults and children and reduce lots of the stresses on both of those services. But next slide, please. It'd be really, really important to say and talk about the context and how we came about to this point. So from October to January, we pulled together a really, really, really basic system, which had a front end that we're able to record case notes against. But before that, the cyber attack happened on a Sunday. And on Monday morning, Hackney's IT team got together to figure out kind of what to do next. They pulled together a really, really basic system just for recording case notes and all of that stuff using Google Forms, spreadsheets, and a data studio. And I just wanted to recognize their efforts because we were able to get something going and social workers were able to do their jobs in about 10 days, which I think is like nothing short of heroic. And then after those 10 days from October to January, we pulled together our first kind of MVP. And as you can see, there's lots and lots of front ends all stacked next to each other and pages on that side. And that's kind of how it looks. So if you want to do the next slide, please, Rob, kind of what does this system look like underneath the bonnet. So what we had was Google Forms for basically person creation and case note creation, which was then stored in a cloud-hosted database and then displayed on a front end. And as we developed further this system, these person and case note creations became native, and they became used using modern open source APIs. If you want to do the next slide, please, Rob. And we built it in this way, and why this is important, simply because it was the quickest way to get the service back up and running. I mean, that 10 days using Google Forms was kind of quite astounding. And then we chose to use open source, open APIs, just because to get freedom from vendor lock-in. We knew the other track would exist of that Mosaic recovery. So we wanted to make sure that we could future-proof anything that we built, knowing that it could potentially only be interim. And also it was really our only option, considering we're still in the heart of cyber recovery. So those were kind of the reasons why we went down this route, and it became kind of the only viable option. If you want to do the next slide, Rob. Some complications with doing it this way, because we were in cyber recovery modes, and what we were essentially doing was recreating processes for the service based on either native forms or Google Forms. We were recreating old processes that previously hadn't been utilized or weren't working completely that well. And due to the way that we spun everything up so quickly, architecture could be quite unstable and quite tricky at points. And then also the other complications with social care, obviously, is it's undergoing significant challenges with rising demand, intense regulatory scrutiny, and huge financial challenges. So that's kind of all of the context for our system and what happened. And now I'm going to take us through a bit of a story and a bit of a narrative. Whilst we were building the system, also we were recovering case notes, and this took us about 3.5-ish months, and recovering them was really, really hard. It was a backup of a backup of a backup that we had somewhere, and it was all of the records that we had from social care, and recovering these and putting them into our databases and turning them into native people on our system. Some complications with this: the data was not clean. It was very, very, very messy, which meant that it displayed in very strange ways on our system, with double names and data integrity, with some issues there. So that was just a short reason why it's really, really, really challenging. Next slide, please. And basically, we continue to build out all of the work and recover all of the case notes until we had something that was like case notes that were native, which you can see on the right hand side of this slide. We were able to allocate workers to cases. We had relationships between people and family members. We had like a really good search which indexed in a really, really smart way. We had edit a resident on a page that was restricted to certain people, and we had a work tray and manage workers. So we were recovering and building out the system whilst the track Mosaic approach was happening, and these were the kinds of functionality that we got to. If you want to do the next slide, please, Rob. So here's a general timeline view of how it happened. So cyber attack in October. Within 10 days, we were able to get something up and running. We were using Google Forms, and then in January, we were able to release that front end with native forms in 2021. And then we slowly introduced historic works, all of those case notes. We had launch of worker allocations, launch of resident details and editing, and launch of relationships. So we did all of those things, and we were constantly digitizing processes that social care were using and adults were using. If you want to do the next slide. And now's kind of a bit of a fork in the road, where we had children's and family services choosing to, out of the two tracks, to go back to Mosaic. And in October 2021, they committed to that single track, and adults agreed that children's really should go first in that process. And we found that Mosaic didn't have modern RESTful APIs, and at the time it wasn't feasible to integrate. And this had some problems with, say, I was someone that's 17 in social care, and then I was, say, moving to being 18, and how we were going to get our person in our system to then move into adults was a real challenge. And that proved really, really tricky towards the end of the program. So once this happened, we only focused on adults. And with this, we were continuing to digitize their processes and develop them out until we got to the support 3C form. And this form is the review of care and support plan. And this form was different to all of the other forms. Lots of reasons why. It was really, really long. It had lots of free text boxes that we kind of weren't used to in all of the other processes that we were delivering, and our system really couldn't take it. And we spent maybe a few months trying to digitize this one process, and it didn't work. And it kind of broke the way that we were working. So we took a pause and we kind of reflected on how we could work differently, because we recognized this was a really important piece of work and it didn't work for adults. So if you want to go on to the next slide. Out of this, we after our thinking, we thought we could do the work in a bit of a better way. Rather than digitizing processes that were built on Mosaic, that were used, the technology of Mosaic was informing the way that we were doing practice at times. We thought we could do it better. We could design in a more human way. We could build something from the ground up for social workers rather than what they previously had. And the goal was really to digitally transform directly with adults social care. And we got a new team called the Core Pathway team. And this team had developers, designers, product leads, delivery managers, and was really at the hub of all the good stuff that came after this. So if you want to do the next slide. So what did we do? So we started off by doing a design sprint. And with that design sprint, it lasted 2 weeks, and we did some like initial interviews where we found that it would be really, really beneficial if we could get some seconded time from someone from adults to be our point of contact to early prototype with, and we managed to get that. So we did a complete audit of all of those processes as well. And we came up with new ideas to be able to work on how we present these processes and how we make social workers' lives easier. And we did lots of prototype testing, and then we improved those prototypes. And we basically formed a bit of a feedback loop and continued doing that. So what did we do? We managed to take a complex collection of Google Forms and processes and turn them into something that looked a bit like this. What we found was all of those forms and processes were trying to do the same thing, but slightly different. So they were always interpreting the Care Act in a really, really different and slightly strange, sometimes interesting ways. But they were all trying to do the same thing. So what we did was we streamlined all of those forms, and there was over about 50 or 60 into a much smaller resident journey, social care worker journey that looked a bit like this. And as you can see in the background, it looks a bit like a Kanban board where things were flowing through. And all of these forms were smaller, sharper, and much more process light on the social worker. And that's really where we found our successes. And our technology choices for this. So we used trunk-based development when we were doing this piece of work. And what that means is that we were pushing lots of the work straight to live. We were doing test work with like writing our tests as we go, and everything was really, really incremental. Again, we chose open source, having children's already go back to Mosaic. We realized we kind of needed to be able to have something that could be shared later on amongst other councils, amongst potentially other vendors, and lots of different reasons why we chose that open source technology. And we also started off small. We started off by having one team that we worked with. And then we scaled outwards to the rest of adult social care. So we were able to build those forms in a small way and then develop them larger, which is a much better way of doing things rather than doing everything in a panic of a cyber attack. Next slide, please. Cool. And kind of what we found is that we got lots of buy-in by doing that pilot approach, by building from the ground up. And this is one of the quotes that we had from one of our performance managers. And what we've heard is that it really helped residents and social workers, and there's really something in there. If you could do the next slide, please, Rob. Cool. And now I'm passing back to Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so we joined the project. I haven't seen Will's question. I'll have a look in a second, Rob. We picked up a part of the project. We were kind of hired to work on the brokerage and finance system. This is the last piece of the puzzle, as it were, in terms of an end-to-end backbone or spine of an adult social care system. It would basically need to take the needs of the service users as identified in the core pathway and captured in the pathway, and match them to the providers who could actually deliver the services they needed. And then the second part is to actually identify who needs paying and when. And that involves both the providers and the service users who occasionally needed payments as a kind of bridging whilst things were processed. I'm a little hesitant to use the term MVP always, as it often raises misconceptions and misunderstanding. Just to be clear, the minimum viable product here, it's not a prototype. It's working software. It needs to be live within the service. The reason it's minimal is it just doesn't have all the bells and whistles that people might like, but it definitely had to be a working service. We thought in January 2022, when we were engaged to pick up the work, that we were just going to finish off some work that had been going on in the background with another team for about a year. Actually, we were just going to pick that up and finish it off and launch it. But actually, what happened is it transpired that the trust in this system that had been built, not the one Alex is talking about, the brokerage and finance one in the background, was quite low. The brokerage and finance team hadn't really been close enough to the project and the process to trust that it was close to completion. So within Hackney, the decision was made to start again with a kind of rapid discovery, prototyping and build. They'd learned an awful lot in the last year and felt like they could start again and get further quicker. So our approach was we definitely knew we needed to build better relationships with the brokerage and finance team. Our approach at Unboxed is always, where possible, to take someone from the service delivery team and give them the name of product owner. That means they're embedded within the team and they are part of the decision-making process. They're involved in the research and design, and they are making decisions about what should be included and what shouldn't. So we managed to build a good relationship with that person in the team. I think the point about user-centered design is obviously it must center on users, and often that's not the case when it comes to back office systems. So we felt like it's really important that we listen to our users, who were the brokerage and finance team. We also wanted to align more closely with the core pathway team and the product that Alex has described. As you can see, there were certain design patterns that are emerging, such as the Kanban board, very closely aligned with the GDS design system, but obviously shifting towards a back office system. New features were being developed. We just wanted there to be a consistent experience for users across the two systems, and also to align with the technology choices that were being made across the organization. There was an API playbook emerging, which was describing how API should operate as a layer above the databases, and also more lightweight React interfaces. And yeah, the aim was to, and what we delivered was, we managed to design, test, build and launch a working system that was based on the validated user needs and was trusted by the users, by the brokerage and finance team. Some of the challenges we faced, I mean, this is not unusual, it's to be expected, but there were some highly complex bits of functionality around calculations that needed to be visible to the staff. They needed to trust that they were working, and that involved a lot of thinking, a lot of work. The second challenge, which we possibly did underestimate, was the challenge of the data, which has already been alluded to. It had been quite widely dispersed. It was inconsistent, and we had a real struggle bringing all that together and getting it into the new system. And then I guess finally the final challenge for us was that the runway was getting shorter and shorter. There was a lot of anxiety around the fact that data was still sitting in spreadsheets, that the systems weren't, there wasn't a live and reliable system in place. So we did it, we launched, and it was popular with users, and we knew that it worked. I'm going to hand back to Rob to explain what happened next.
Thank you, Martin. So what happened next? So we'd already, as Alex said, Children's Services had decided that they would narrow their focus onto the Mosaic track once that got to a point where they had enough confidence that they were within reach of returning to Mosaic. So they sort of sat with the modern tools on an interim basis while they then focused their energies on moving into Mosaic. We then within adult services, we'd also had new leaders coming in. And again, I think the really important context to this to keep remembering is this was still during the period of time when COVID was very much dominating everybody's work. And the services had been working in an environment where their usual systems were not there. And they had, as Alex said, been initially focusing very much on running on Google Forms and spreadsheets, which is very challenging. So the new leadership decided that they would focus on core practice, and therefore we'd hold the development work on the modern tools as they were. That was, in their view, that was sufficient to carry on in their interim mode. And then similarly to with children's, they would then focus their efforts on the Mosaic return. So at that point, we stopped further significant development. So to pick up on Will's point, it is not a complete replacement of a legacy system. But I think really importantly, as Alex and Martin both explained, we also didn't seek to simply just like for like with a new user interface and different software. There's actually some fundamental rethinking of processes, simplification of the user journey, which is really important in there. So there is code. It does, it was, we worked under an open source license. I think it isn't a case of just turn it back on. So I think, Martin, in the questions, you could talk a little bit about what you've done looking at that. So it would need to be some investment of effort to turn that into a product, which is then ready as a demonstrator. But I think it really importantly, I think we have demonstrated a viable path towards a approach which is modern, user-centered. I think that's really important. This isn't just about replacing software. It's about fundamental redesign of the user process, how users work. And really importantly, that point about interoperability, coming back to the ways that suppliers lock us in as a market. Interoperability, or the lack thereof, is one of the key levers which suppliers use. What was really important of this work was it baked interoperability in at the heart. So it's not ready just to turn on, but we definitely felt really confident that we'd shown that there was a very viable path here. And working with colleagues in NHSX, DHSC, I think we also saw that there was an appetite there. So there definitely is an opportunity. I think we've shown what was possible, and we've shown that that's viable. It would be brilliant to think about ways that actually this could then be built on, taken on, and used as an opportunity to drive real change. So just to recap, a few reflections to take away and then time for conversation. So firstly, the context made this really hard. So it presented the opportunity around the twin track because we knew that firstly, just getting back to normal in the normal way would take a very long time and would not leave the services in a position which was sustainable just using spreadsheets. So it did create that opportunity, but it also makes it very, very difficult. So services in crisis have so many other things to do. It's very hard to actually work, kind of do transformational change as well. So it's a double-sided coin, really. But we certainly saw how working really closely with users, the type of work that Alex and Martin explained, really created opportunities to rethink how ways how people work and look for opportunities and build momentum. Martin. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We've already touched upon the importance of building these close working relationships with the teams who will actually be using the software and the leaders around them, I think. If you can build that trust, then you're more able to challenge those users and stakeholders and to shift their thinking away from just a slightly better version of what they're currently using or what they're used to. But I'd also like to reflect that bringing in partners from other organizations is more likely to deliver long-term success. We'd love Will. Sorry, Will, I know you've got to drop off if you're still here. Let's talk about this next week, about how other councils could pick this work up and build on what we achieved in Hackney. But it's so much harder for them to do that if they haven't also been involved in the design and development process. We've been working on an open source back office planning system as part of MHCLG's Open Digital Planning Programme. And this has involved close collaboration with many councils across the country. And that means that we have been able to challenge the way things are done, especially where they're done differently for no real good reason other than that's how the systems and processes currently work here or in this organisation, and build something that genuinely works for many, if not all, planning teams. It's taken much longer, and adoption is still a huge challenge, but it does seem like it could actually work. So my reflection really is, maybe if we'd involved some other councils, and if it wasn't such a time of crisis, if time wasn't such an issue, maybe if we had been able to engage other councils in the process, we might be in a better position now to have other councils pick up the work. That's my reflection. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, my reflection is that the rapid development was both a good and a really challenging thing too. Getting something up and running with Google Forms within 10 weeks, 10 days for recording what social workers do, and then 10 weeks to have a front end system was like nothing short of a miracle. And yeah, I think it was a huge win. But also was a real challenge when it came to the complications that it caused the system and social workers during that time. But also that doing rapid development really closely with social workers in the same team, in the same environment, proved to be like a resounding success. And getting that buy-in from the ground up with service areas is just super important. And yeah, that's kind of my reflection on the program.
Thanks, Alex. And whilst I touched on we had some changes of leadership in our context, but again, with any big transformation, it's really important to make sure that you've got that consistent support at leadership levels as well. And I think one of my observations from the work is the more that you can show impact and value early, the more that you can build that confidence through showing, as Martin said, you're working hand in glove with the colleagues who are going to have to use the thing. As Alex said, you can demonstrate the impact of how different approaches to work, different processes can actually lead to better outcomes and can create new opportunities. The more that you can make sure that's really visible to leaders, the more you can help maintain the momentum. And thinking ahead, because these things can take some time to deliver. So you're looking at 2 or 3 years to really get to the point where you can say this is now normal. So you need to think about how you can make sure that you've got that leadership support throughout. And then finally, just to recap, there's definitely a big opportunity here. We, along with children's social care, temporary accommodation and special educational needs, the cost of social care is one of the 4 big areas that is crippling local government. Demand is rising and rising faster. Funding's under ever more pressure. There is no magic funding thing that will save this. So there's really is an opportunity here where current technologies are locking in ways of working which are very siloed, locking in service models which are very siloed. There's an opportunity here to really take a step out of that, which is fundamental. It's not just about the software. It's fundamental to helping create a more agile, innovative and integrated service model and supporting a shift from crisis response to care needs to more preventative work. So there's a real compelling strategic opportunity here, we think. So Nick, that is our presentation. Back to you.